Islandora 7 installations with Fedora and whatever it comes with. So we've done that, and let me pull one up. What's a good one? Okay, so this is one of our sites. So what we did is we pretty much used the same kind of theming system that we use, or base theming idea that we used for our websites at the time, which is to keep things simple and clean and close to Islandora. Islandora 7 is a bear to theme because of Fedora. So we really try to keep it simple and have one pattern for all our websites. We've did some more complex ones like I can find that. So this is the Detroit Public Library. This is a Detroit Public Library Drupal 7 site. They had some very specific requirements, and this site took a lot of work, hundreds of hours easy of work to build. So we've done that, and these all run on fairly modest AWS instances. This one less modest than the Burbank one. So here comes Claw, Islandora 8, Islandora 2, IL2, whatever you call it. Now we are at that. And I don't really have anything that I can show you right now because the only site that we have is still under development and they don't really want me to show it, but it's also for Detroit. And Detroit is pretty much the only client we had that had enough money to do a full boat IL2 installation. And they wanted Fedora. They wanted pretty much everything except Matomo, so that's what they got. And we did this, and we did do it in collaboration with Born Digital because we needed help. So that's what we've done. But what we also have is we have Burbank, and we have the other 7,000 some public libraries in the United States, and not to mention ones elsewhere, like here, who all really have a need for this kind of system. And the question is, what can we do for them? And what can we do for a library that has maybe $3,000 to $5,000 a year budget, maybe a little more, and maybe that same amount to get started. So there are answers, but that's really what I want to explore here, and I certainly want to, I see we have people from all ends of the spectrum here, so I'd really like to hear what they have to say. Some of the things that have been suggested are, just dropping off BlazeGraph and Fedora, which helps. We're also looking at trying to get out of Docker because we are AWS based. If we were based on hardware, we definitely Docker, no problem. We definitely want to do that, but we're not. So we found that, for IL2, it's really hard to get it to run on a server that has less than 16 gig of RAM, which on AWS that's the biggest server we've ever had, and we've been AWS partners since S3 started. So, so Detroit can afford that. None of our other clients can. I don't know what DGI is doing with public libraries. I know that Born Digital has Providence, I think. But it's the same situation. They have to have the budget to be able to do that, and most libraries do not have it. So, what do we do. So we're looking at that. I've been talking to Nat and other folks about doing an Ansible install, which can get it down a lot further in terms of what it actually needs. And that R8 extra large, extra large, I think, the server, the big server we're talking about, that's not particularly fast. It's going to need something, once we get the site built, it's going to need something substantial in front of it, CDN wise, to keep it going. I don't know if we'll go to Varnish, but we'll definitely go to something to keep it responsive. So, responsive in the sense of responds quickly. Of course, all our sites are responsive. But so, we're doing that. We're also starting to take a look at Archipelago as an alternative. Don't really want to go there. I mean, we have a lot of time and energy invested in Islandora. Like I say, I've been around, not all the time, but I've been around Islandora for a long time, and I definitely think that this can be made to work. So, what are we going to do here? Well, I'd really like to hear from people who have smaller installations, people who want smaller installation, what you think the bottom line is for an Islandora instance. What can't you live without? I don't have the chart of all the services up here, but I'm sure it's available somewhere here. Oh, except for this side. Okay. So I'm not sure where that is, so I won't get it quite yet unless we need it, in which case I'll find it. So, would anyone like to start off here? It's going to be a very short presentation otherwise. Nat?
Yeah, I think we have a couple of components that are not part of standard Islandora, or we don't have.
You want to come up here because it's kind of hard to hear you.
Oh, sorry. I have an interest in smaller repositories because I help run a couple of community archives, and they don't have much resources as well. So what I would like to see is to start with Drupal, because Islandora 2.0 is pretty much Drupal, right? And all the other components are add-ons or as required. See, start with Drupal. So the smallest installation could be just a Drupal site with Drupal's database search, right? And that will work, depending on your needs. Say you want more complex, and the other factor is, do you need microservices? If you don't need microservices, say you already have PDFs and you already have your directories, or you can pre-generate your directories, you can almost cut out the full microservices stack, right? Because that's going to cost you a lot of Java, and that's going to be memory intensive, right? So to me, start with Drupal. Drupal can, even though the latest Drupal with their full out database cache does cost you, maybe you can run it with 1-2 gigabit of RAMs. It does require more than the previous versions, but that's still much less than the 16 gig RAM that you need to start I'll with, right? Start with Drupal, and then if you need additional things, say for example, if you don't have any images, do you really need an image server, right? If you don't need fancy zoom in, you don't need the image server, right? So image server can become an optional thing, but of course, let's say for example, if you don't need page content with Meadowweaver, and you just have a lot of PDFs, you don't need the image server, right? And then the Fedora and Blazegraph are totally optional. If you're really not using any Spark queries, or if you don't have any use cases for Spark queries, why bother indexing into Blazegraph unless you have real use cases and you have use cases to contribute link data to say Wikidata or so forth, right? And same thing with Fedora. what we do at UTSC is we bag the stuff, and then we have other preservation options. Obviously, we have other preservation options, but Mark Jordan has a very neat bagging module. So you could bag the notes, media, and we have a little bit of script to convert them into OCFL, version it as OCFL, and you can store the bags. Let's say you can throw it into AWS, right? So that will handle your preservation, which is checksum. You can do it in Drupal, and the preservation, which is basically getting a snapshot, storing another copy somewhere, right? So unfortunately, none of the deployment options really gives you a way to configure these things out of the box. Say, for example, I'll build kit, you can, say, for example, remove the Fedora. It does require a little bit of work, but you can do that. Same thing with Blazecraft. Blazecraft is a little bit easier. Just turn off some configs. Solar is probably the only other thing I would say is mandatory. So Solar and Drupal, you can probably get away with 4 gig RAM. You know what I mean? So it's the other thing is, like, it does depend on some use cases. So for example, if you need MariaDB and you do need, the image server and so forth, it does going to, require more resources. So it's maybe project-based projects, and deployment needs to be a little bit more configurable.
Can I add a little bit to that?
Yeah.
So a couple of ways that this is experience partly from working with Islandora, but partly also at a previous job I worked doing publishing journals, academic journals. And one thing that we found very helpful was to have one Drupal that we called the batch server that had high memory limits, and you could throw a lot of like batch tasks at. We called it the batch server, and it wasn't exposed to the web, that's the outside network. And then we had other servers running the same Drupal instances, just that we called the webheads, and they had tried pretty hard to keep the PHP memory limit low. Treated that as oftentimes when you're in development, you run out of memory, you're like, okay, I'll make the PHP memory limit higher. That fixes the problem. And then you don't think about how that affects production. So that was one way to keep those two things separate, those two tasks. And your batch server doesn't have to run on AWS; it can run on your laptop if you want. Like NatSet generating derivatives offline ahead of time. Another thing that I haven't run it too much myself, but there's a Drupal module called Tome, which takes your Drupal site and spits out a static version of it. So if you're not running a lot of things that require real-time interaction with users logging in and affecting the site, that's absolutely an option I would probably suggest, just to keep your security problems less of an emergency when they might happen.
Have you actually seen Islandora sites that use that, or
Not
done
Islandora
that?
sites, but it's a fairly well-used Drupal module at this point.
Yeah, I'm just not sure, because there was a module, I forget what it was called, that did the same thing. It was very popular for a while, but really didn't work that well with things that changed. There's also a module that throws it into a static website, totally. I'm just not sure how well that would work. It would be interesting to try, for sure. So here is the new and reduced charge. Personally, I think for public libraries, I think it would be difficult to come up with a setup without Cantaloupe. I think you really, because mostly they are images, and mostly they start with because I've been working with libraries since they were doing this in-house, and they would start with these banker's boxes full of images, and that would be the start of their collection. So that's pretty much still what they are mostly working with is historical image collections. My clients, your mileage may differ. The other thing, we haven't really gone to, because I don't know that it works for us, is multi-site. We could do these with multi-site, which would allow us to work on a big server, because we're really not using that part of the server. The issue is with clients, and the fact they want to have their own thing. Even if they don't want to pay for it. So so we're really looking at that. I mean, I think like Nat's approach, which is pretty heavy slash and burn, I'd call it. Somewhere between that and not that heavy slash and burn is going to be the solution, or at least it's going to be the first thing we try, because we're going to be putting effort into this for the rest of this year. This is one of our major initiatives, and of course anything we do will be public, so it's not, we have no secrets. So anyone else want to talk about their story or what they're trying to do or where they're having problems or anything? Go for it.
You talked about running it in the cloud, like on AWS or Azure and such. And it sounds, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like we kind of were looking here to try to optimize and cut the cost at the Islandora level. But it also, just from all the, some of the memes I've seen when it comes to cloud service and everything, maybe it's like trying to optimize there with the cloud service providers. I assume you probably optimize that to death and probably
Yes.
everything you can get out of it from them.
Well, really, that's in our wheelhouse, and now, I mean, we work with AWS exclusively because we've had good results from them and haven't found a compelling reason to go multi-cloud or with other cloud. If we did, I mean, I like what Google does, but I do not trust Google in the least. They have a tremendous history of offering something and saying, "Oh, this doesn't make us money. It's over next week," and we can't live. And we've never had that with Amazon. So Amazon has a lot of choices. Selecting the right server, all of that helps, but mostly it's incremental. I mean, of course, is $25 a month important? Well, it depends on if it's your $25. I mean, yeah, it's important. So we do really hammer on this as much as we can, but at some point, that hammering doesn't really help. When you've got one of these R8 servers with all this memory, there's only so much you can do. The existential problem for us is that when we run just on hardware without Docker, services use whatever they use at whatever time they're using it, and they're generally not all using everything at the same time. But if you're in Docker, you're pretty much locked in to a certain, and on one of these servers, you're locked into a certain size. You have to have that much memory. Otherwise, you're going to wind up in trouble at some point. It's almost guaranteed. So, running separate services directly on the hardware rather than in a container really allows a better balance of usage. So, if you have a 16 gig server and you're going to use all those services, there's no way it's going to go down to 2 gigs. But it might go down to 8 gigs or, even less. But, in Amazon, it's 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, up to, an incredible number. But it's double, so that's it. You don't have 6 gig is not a choice, at least not now. Because of the way they split servers.
Are you using shared solar and image servers, or do each of the sites get their own solar and image server and so forth?
Each of the sites get their own server. That's just proved most manageable for us. Like I say, we could do this all. We could just get one, if we had like 50 sites, we could get one humongous server, or actually we'd have to have two at that point, just to avoid sudden death syndrome. But we could do that, but that's not a model that really has worked for us in the past. Now, I mean, we at one point, like almost every Drupal shop, we were running. I had a client running hundreds of multi-sites on one server. We didn't do that, but our client did. Not recommended, but still, you could do that back in that day, and because of the limitations of hardware and everything else, 15 years ago, that seemed like a reasonable solution. There was a system called Eager, that was a hosting system that some people had good success with. Some people built businesses on it. Didn't really work at the level we needed. I'm an old guy, and I'm a command line guy, and I write scripts to do stuff, and Ansible, whether it's Ansible playbooks or just any of the other, we've written our own CI systems. We don't use it now, but we have done that. So that's just the nature of our peculiar approach to it, is to do that, which gets us a pretty high level of efficiency, which you trade off by development time for writing this stuff and testing it all. Anyone else?
I have a question for the room. Has anyone costed out hosted solar versus running a solar box yourself? Which probably wouldn't be cost effective if you have your own hardware, but if you're paying Amazon, you might be better off getting like Acquia Solar.
Acquia Solar? I can't imagine that you'd be better off getting anything from Acquia.
There's others. There's not.
There are others, yes. The Acquia is, I love Acquia. Drupal would have a very hard time without Acquia. But Acquia is not the heart of Drupal development. Acquia is a giant sales organization designed to bring in as much money as possible, which is okay. That's what companies are supposed to do, and they are very good at it. But they're not really, if you are a major institution with a big budget, Acquia is a good place to be. They have great services. I have no issue with their services, but if you're a small library or a small company like mine, they're not really much of a fit.
I shouldn't have said Acquia in particular, but paying Amazon to run a big Java program on one of their EC2 servers is also going to cost you a lot more money than it really theoretically should. So.
Well, but Alexander, how much should it cost?
Well, that's the question. Like, how much would it cost? Like, that's why I was asking if anyone has looked into how much it could cost.
I run Solar on small instances, and I've run Solar for our small sites. I've run Solar for like 10 sites on a small instance at Amazon. That does not cost very much.
Okay, that's good.
It couldn't be much cheaper than that. It's hands-on. They don't maintain it. I maintain it. We maintain it. But Solar doesn't take a lot of maintenance, honestly, as long as you don't run out of disk space, in which case you're totally screwed. But you just monitoring is, of course, one of the keys to AWS. Having good data on what your systems are actually doing and using. So that's our approach. But anyone else? We're about halfway through here. I don't think we're going to make it to 5 o'clock, honestly. But we don't have to. There's no rule we have to sit here till then. But really, I just like to knock out any questions anyone might have, and you know, get any input that anyone might have. So if you're sitting on a burning question, now's the time.
So actually, so you said most of your clients you've been using Docker then, or VC, except for
We okay. So we only have one IL2 instance. We only have one Islandora 2 instance, and that is Detroit. That's the only thing we've got going right now. We have others that are in the works, but we're really looking at what we can do to make this work for them. So, you know, IL2 and Islandora 2 have been a long slog. They've been, what, 6, 7, 8 years since, more maybe? I mean, I've been in countless, I sort of backed off for the last year or so, but I've been in countless development meetings with, you know, with some of the smartest people that I've ever met, some of whom are here, you know, trying to get this in order and make it work and make it consistent and make it serve the needs of the community. You know, and like most things, like most open source, like most open source things, it's largely driven by the big institutions who put money into it. You know, who either put money, you know, through Born Digital and DGI, or directly, or have huge development teams. I mean, it's amazing how big some of the teams have been on at some universities. You know, so that's really where it comes from and has come from for a long time. But I don't think that any of those institutions want to own Islandora, but they just need to get their job done, and they have the resources to do it, and we all benefit from that in the long run, because, you know, a lot, if not all of that, gets contributed back to the community. But the downside is, you know, this thing, which a year ago was at least 50% bigger, you know, is what you get, because this isn't a big downside to them, because they can run it. They could spin up a server the size of this desk and run anything on it. But most of us can't. So that's really, you know, our job, or my job and our job, is to leverage what we get from this and make it work for our situation. Because the alternatives, hey, there's still Content DM. You know, there's still Nuxio. You know, there's many things out there that folks can go to, but they're all way more expensive than anything you could possibly pay to do this. Well, I don't know about possibly. You could possibly pay a whole lot to do this. I mean, if somebody offered me $1 million to do a site, I'd be happy to take it. I don't know how I would bill it, but, you know, but really, you know, there are many other choices. A lot of those choices are, you know, the word DAMS, the Digital Asset Management System, means a lot of different things to a lot of people. And, you know, I think I first encountered it in the broadcast industry, where, you know, they have a lot of digital assets, recordings, videos, whatever, managing that. You know, essentially, Netflix is a digital asset management system in the strict term, the broad term. But, you know, what we consider a digital asset management system has less to do with just shepherding the digital assets. Well, it's all shepherding, but then like metadata. I mean, librarians. I'm a librarian. I admit it. Librarians love metadata. Uh, and that's really what we do. Is what's really important in a library digital asset management system? Well, what's important is making sure things are findable and relatable and organizable, and that relies on having consistent, understandable metadata, which is something that most systems do not really allow for. I mean, it still requires, I guess it's full employment for librarians, but I mean, it still requires people who understand what metadata is to really work with metadata. Whether you're working with Islandora or Mark Records, God help you, you really, it's really all about having a solid base in metadata. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about, from your experience, what are some of the, do you feel that old Outdoor 7 was easier to implement for smaller institutes and also more cost effective from a system architecture standpoint? And how was it? Was it a lot like, is this Islandora 8 one of the problems you're seeing, that it's so monolithic than it used to be?
Let me tell you how I feel, and then you can throw me out. I really fought tooth and nail every step of the way through Islandora 7 to be more like what Islandora 8 is. Okay. To me, the way that the reliance on Fedora as the base of the product, which is really what it was, that was not a winning proposition for me, because, first off, if you're developing, you need Java developers. And like I said about the theming was really difficult, getting a consistent theme between what came out of Fedora and what came out of Drupal. I mean, Drupal was, and you couldn't use all those wonderful Drupal tools. And there are a lot of wonderful Drupal tools. I mean, this is, it's like, okay, well, Islandora 2, that's my dream. Not always a good dream, but it was my dream, really, to get to this. I mean, I was pushing, folks at UPEI from the get, 15 years ago. I think that's about when it started, be more Drupal. Make this a Drupal installation profile or module or whatever. But we didn't, and we had the, all of what my brain just doesn't want to think about these things. But what are the project? What were the Islandora packages? Solution packs. We had solution packs. Well, I'm sure that somebody in this room has written a solution pack, but not fun. Not fun. We wrote various things across the years. They work with enough work and effort, but it was not fun to do. Yeah, and not that it has to be fun. Of course, we're doing this for a living, but it just needed to be less of a headache. This is much more straightforward, even though it doesn't look that way. This is much more straightforward because really, it's all based on Drupal. All those blue lines, they're all Drupal. You eliminate the things that don't have blue lines connected to them, and it becomes a lot simpler. Although some of the things have blue lines at other places, but really, this is a lot more straightforward because On the presentation side, it's all Drupal, which means you can theme it, you can make it look good.
It can be even more Drupal.
Huh?
It can be even more.
It can be even more Drupal. And I mean, if you look at Archipelago, that's even more Drupal. I mean, really, it's almost totally Drupal, I think. I really can't speak to it, but, you know, I think we can find a solution that's going to work for more people. You know, if you're doing more than one of these, you're going to be running into conversations like the one we had with Detroit, where they felt they really needed Fedora. They weren't sure why. I mean, really, you know, they weren't, but they wanted to have Fedora. They wanted, and there are reasons to have Fedora. You know, there's certainly reasons, but the way that their site works, I don't really see that as a factor myself. But they are the client. They make the final decisions, and our job is to implement what they want. So that's why we've done this. And also, it was a tremendous, you know, honestly, it was a tremendous benefit to us because, you know, we got the opportunity to get our hands really dirty with this stuff, you know, and not on our own time because, you know, we don't have, you know, $1 million development budget for our free product, you know, so we were very fortunate in that regard. But one of the things we learned is we need to get a handle on the size of this thing.
Do we think that, like, historically the selling point of Islandora was it can be your preservation tool and a snazzy website? And I think, like, in my kind of personal opinion, I'm not speaking for my employer about this, but I think that, like, the preservation aspect has kind of fallen away as never really being a huge kind of factor. Like, I said 15 years ago, back in the early days of Islandora, like, you know, Fedora itself was developed by like a couple of developers, and I said, you know, I just kind of said a little bit brashly, like, what do you think is going to be around in 20 years, more likely to be more around in 20 years, MySQL or this Fedora thing? And I probably should have bet money on that, right? But MySQL is definitely going to be around. It powers the entire internet. So, you know, I think at this point in this day and age, like, a couple of good redundant backups to your website is, I wouldn't say all the preservation you need, but, like, you know, I don't think we have enough people and resources to fulfill whatever requirements for like a real proper preservation system. And what people really seem to want is websites, because that's how people ingest their content. And websites are just, you know, we're in the website business much more so than the preservation business is something I might say.
And I mean, I think that we can solve some of those preservation problems, challenges, whatever tasks in Drupal. I think that there's a lot we can do in Drupal to do that. You know, it won't be, you know, what Fedora is. I mean, obviously that's a completely focused product it's now on Fedora 6. And, you know, I think that if I was running a major educational institution library, I would definitely want Fedora. You know, I'm not. My clients aren't. You know, so that's why we're not looking at that. But, you know, it just, the question is, well, you know, do we need a totally separate product? There have been other products. There's been, I forget what the name of it is, that was very popular for a while. That was a very lightweight Omeka, you know, but Omeka never went anywhere. Omeka, I think, lost sight. Pardon?
The institution I worked at previously, they hired me to learn Omeka and teach it to everybody, and they're still using it, and they refuse to give it out.
Well, that's fine if it fits their needs, but Omeka doesn't do a fraction of what Islandora. If you cut out everything on that chart except Drupal, solar, it doesn't really do a fraction of that. So it's it's disappointing because they had the opportunity to create a product that would have been very, very useful to across the board for libraries, and they basically just punted. So that was
It's easy to learn, I'll give it that, but
oh
it
yeah,
doesn't
oh yeah,
really
it
go
is.
very far.
It is. It was in some ways a great product, but it only went so far, and you could only do so much with it. So.
I feel like it's come back to what Mr. Sorry, didn't get your name. Nat. What Nat said at the beginning of this is that it sounds like with some customers, if they like say if they don't need Fedora or there's a lot of stuff going, it sounds like you could just start off with a Drupal site. I mean, and let's see if I understand what you meant by that. You meant specifically not just like not even using Islandora at all. Just basically take the Drupal and
So
go roll with
there
it.
are many benefits that Islandora provides but I would think of them from a point of view of Drupal modules, right? Say for example search, say for example the metadata profile, or the citation, or the viewers. The meta viewer was developed, the manifest. Sort of the modules, the documentation, good practices that Islandora provides is tremendous value, right? But you don't necessarily need Fedora. Even right now, you don't need Fedora. It's an optional thing. You can configure your media to be where it's stored. You can remove the Fedora out, right?
So back to that spectrum. So maybe come back from that end. Take Islandora, cut out Fedora. You're already getting more. You're already getting a true Dan's with a bunch of practice and everything without starting from scratch all over again. Which a Drupal site,
Exactly.
a plain going to Drupal that and trying to make a digital preservation website yourself out of Drupal is probably way over here, and there's probably no good case for that. The best you do is host a couple pictures, and I don't even know if there's any other kind of metadata or modules out there that are lighter than anything. So
Yeah, in essence, Islandora has become a Drupal repository solution, right?
Yeah.
It has always been, but there has been always this sort of going back and forth about, how much we align with Drupal, and the march has been to align more with Drupal, and we can go even further. I think we have a sort of a discussion on Friday. There are like a couple of small things that we can do. There's a little bit of technical backlog that we can sort of do to just make it just Drupal, because
wow.
most of the universities use Drupal for their library website.
Yeah.
So we just make use of all that infrastructure, all that expertise, and why throw certain idiosyncrasies that are sort of leftover crap? But it is fair because there are a lot of legacy systems, and we cannot simply say, do this, and by what we done is like we've done certain decisions that are like not properly aligned with the standard Islandora, but you can,
Yeah, the media direction.
Yeah, that's my main beef.
But you know what does work, because I tested this because I was testing the Drupal 10 compatibility, is what works perfectly well is Composer, Require, Islandora, enable it just on any old Drupal 10 site, and then I just configured, I just ran Cantaloupe by downloading the Java jar and ran it to point at the Drupal web root and to serve local files, and that I could just turn on Mirador, Composer, Require, Islandora, Mirador, turn that on, configure it. I had to patch it to be able to point to local files, but that was a fully running Mirador viewer on just Drupal using the Islandora one. Worked great. So
All right. Show us your demo.
I can. Actually, next my talk on Thursday. I'll just do it then.
Okay. We'll wait for your time. I will be waiting with, I would say bated breath, but that always sounds like,
Yeah.
oh, I ate a bunch of
The
anchovies.
thing that doesn't do, to be fair, is generate the HOCR. So we need the derivatives for that. And if you have any kind of sizable site, turns out alpaca and all that stuff becomes immensely helpful. So I'm not saying
Yeah.
you can cut any of that out. It's like very, very useful for a certain scale, but what you're talking about, the scale you're talking about, you can get away without it, I think. Or you could alter the actions all actions do on the Drupal side is they post a message to Alpaca to do a thing, but you could make a Drupal action that just shells out to Unix and runs Tesseract.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hey ho, let's go. Words of the Ramones. Well, this has been. Once everyone starts talking, this gets really interesting. You know.
and I'm previewing my talk now, I guess, but I guess like one of the things we don't have, I guess, is a good enough understanding and confidence about some of the components of Islandora, especially I think Crayfish and partially think Alpaca, where we're a little bit afraid to touch it. And so things are frozen in amber, and that's why we have these deployment methods that just configure things the one exact way that everything works together that we figured out. But then we don't sort of know enough about the individual components to be able to configure, say, Crayfish in a way that runs on your local Drupal. Why can't it? It's just PHP code. It's Symfony. So why can't I just enable Crayfish on my Drupal?
Yeah, that's a great, that direction is really very useful to have more just pure PHP solutions to
Yeah.
run derivatives rather than jacking up the Java stuff.
Yeah, but I think we just let, like, Jared Wicklow is so good for, bless him for creating it, but if none of us, the rest of us can kind of get our heads around it, or none of our employers are going to pay us to do it, then how sustainable is having this be a necessary part of the stack? I think that's an important question to ask too.
Well, I mean, everyone. It's like the old joke about the weather. Everyone talks about. No one does anything about it. It's the same thing about documentation. Everyone talks about it. I won't say nobody does anything about it, but certainly nobody does enough. Well, no, but honestly, the reason I'm here is because I started with Drupal, and Drupal was so well internally documented. I mean, all the books on Drupal were pretty useless, but if you read the code, you would know everything because it was all really well documented, and that's the key. Anyway, anything else? We got a couple minutes left, I guess.
I think Drupal is in a much better place now in terms of upgrades, where like between Drupal 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 to 8, especially to 8, it was like this employment program for Drupal developers where they had to continuously rewrite stuff over and over again.
Well, 8.3 to 8.4 or 5, that was a huge one.
I think we've gotten through all that, and we've pulled our data into our Drupal 9, 10 sites, and now I think like we're much less of a demand on people paying you, that we don't have to go through this painful upgrade cycle every couple of years now because of how much better architected Drupal is now, and hopefully Islandora can benefit from that too.
Well,
Just to add to Alex's point, I think Islandora project also had a very challenging time with sort of the configuration management. It was a long time Islandora defaults, how do we manage like custom metadata profiles and whatnot, until sort of the starter side came along and said, just do config sync. Just do config sync. And that's how the Drupal is also going, which is with the automatic updates, right? So like if you're maintaining multiple sites, it's really like config sync, or like really sort of, there are more advanced solutions like config split and so forth, where you could do like that, but that's where we ended up. Is like we've tried it. It was a difficult thing to sort of learn how to do config management and Drupal updates, but it is getting easier.
yeah, configuration was interesting. So I was like Alexander Hamilton. I was in the room at the time in Portland when they decided to have the initiatives in Drupal, and configuration was initiatives. And I forget, Greg, what's his name?
Dunlap?
Huh?
Dunlap?
Greg Dunlap, thank you. Led it, and he was on fire, and he finished the configuration initiative before anyone finished anything else. The problem was that after a while it was pretty clear that so many things changed it really didn't work that way. So finally, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, they had to do a new configuration initiative to make it work. And I mean, things like config split, you know, we use it. Explaining it to someone is not necessary. Explaining it in concept is easy, but explaining how you actually use it is not always easy. Integrating it into a deployment system is not always easy, but it's doable. And you know, it's huge because you really don't want a bunch of development modules on your production site, even if they're not running. You don't want them there at all. So okay, old Drupal tale. Back in Drupal 4 or 5, modules would interact with other modules even if they weren't running, which created some really bizarre situations. They don't do that anymore. But it's like, what is happening here? And then you track it down with the printer debugging tools, and say, this is coming from a module that's just sitting there. It's not installed at all. I don't know how that happened, but it did. But yeah, we're beyond that now. We have a lot of tools. There are a lot of best practices. There's Pact has a new Drupal 10 cookbook out that's good. What's his name? Selwyn Pollitt has the Drupal 9 handbook. I forget what it's called, but that's all online, which is great. It doesn't cover everything in the world. It's more a developer-oriented thing. But we have a lot of resources we never had before, you know. So, yeah, I mean, we're very fortunate in that way. We just have to start using them and make it work.
This has been really great, Gary. Thanks for doing
Here's a trivial thing. This light is called Little Light. Company was who, they don't own it now, who started it, was a friend of mine. We were on the Grand Funk Railroad sound crew together.
Oh, goodness.
And I helped build the factory that he built these in when he started doing it. There's trivia for you. And I can still hear a little bit.